A few months ago, I turned an old ring into a new ring for my wife Jen. She hadn't gotten a wedding ring, only an engagement ring. So I took this extra gold, added some new gold, and learned a new skill. It was a fun project and it turned out pretty well. Well enough that my friend Jane commissioned me to make her husband Chris a new ring for their 23rd wedding anniversary. When I make almost anything, the first thing I do is design it in SketchUp. This allows me to 3D model it, make any design changes, visualize what it's going to look like, and something that's really important for this particular type of project is I can measure the volume of it so that I know how much material to order. With precious metals and being that they're very expensive, it's good to order exactly the right amount and not have any waste. For this ring, we decided on palladium 950. It's kind of an alternative to white gold that has some advantages over white gold, which has to be rhodium plated. Palladium is a precious metal. It's kind of in the platinum family, and when it's shined and polished, it looks really cool. It's really bright and white, and it makes an amazing piece of jewelry. When you're making a ring, one of the ways that you can do it is by taking a piece of flat metal and essentially bending it into a circle and then closing it up. On my previous ring, I actually cast my own ingot and I rolled it out, but there are some disadvantages to that. You lose some in the process. So for this one, I was able to find the palladium 950 already in a flat stock in the right width, and then I could get the right length with a little bit of extra. At this point, I'm going to bend the flat stock into the ring shape. Because this was so thick, it took a lot of force to bend it into shape. Anytime you're cold working a metal, such as bending it, stretching it, hammering on it, you're going to create these internal stresses in the metal that can fracture if they're pushed too far. So to prevent that, you have to anneal it. Annealing is taking the metal, heating it up to basically red hot, and then holding it there for about 30 seconds. Simple way to think of it is it's realigning the metal molecules so you can go back to working it. After heating, to cool it down and remove any oxidation, you'll drop it in a pickle solution. At this point, I've got my basic ring shape and I need to solder the ends together. I'm gonna bend them flat, get it as flush as possible, and then I'm gonna solder it. Soldering or brazing involves using a torch to heat up a metal that melts at a melting point slightly less than your base metal, and then it flows into the gap and it connects your metal. So I'm gonna use the oxygen and propylene torch to heat it up, and that solder, which is an alloy of palladium and some metals that melt at a slightly lower temperature, is going to flow into the gap and essentially make the ring into one piece. So here I've got a ring all in one piece, and I just need to file out a little bit of the excess solder from the inside and outside. So with all the excess filed off, I can get it back into a ring shape and start filing it into its final shape. At this point, the steel mandrel does three things. One, it allows me to pound it back into the ring shape. Two, it hardens it. Remember the annealing process? Well, now we want the opposite. So we want to harden it as much as possible, and stretching it over that mandrel is going to do that. And three, the mandrel is graduated in size for ring sizes, so it allows me to get it to exactly the right size. At this point, it's all about filing, getting it into that final shape, getting it perfectly smooth, and then adding any design details. On this ring, it's basically going to be really wide and flat, and then I'm just going to take off the edges on the outside at like a 45-degree angle. Here I'm still getting it completely flattened out. Filing's definitely the most time-consuming part. Go through a lot of different sizes and shapes of files, going from obviously the most coarse down to the finest. After I got the majority of the design done with the files, I switch over to a flex shaft, like a high-speed tool. And that allows you to polish it much more quickly, really clean up the inside and start polishing the outside with different grits of abrasives and sandpaper. A lot of times you have to switch back and forth though, so I'd go back to the file, taking out any imperfections I noticed and cleaning up the design with the 45-degree edge. Once every last scratch is out, you can move on to the final polish. And the last step is just a final polish with a polishing compound and a soft wheel. The polishing doesn't take out any big scratches at all, so if there's still a deep scratch, it'll just polish it up shiny. So it's important to take those out before. This just makes it really beautiful, shiny, and lustrous. And the ring is done. From here, it's going to go to an engraver for some initials and a little marking. But other than that, the ring is done and pretty much ready to be shipped out to my friends for their anniversary. So I was sitting here looking at this extra chunk of palladium, and I started measuring it, and I was thinking, I bet I could get another ring out of this. Just a little thin one out of the same material for Jane. I'm going to have to roll it and stretch it, but I think it can be done. So this is where I decided to try something a little different. And it's kind of neat because this is where skills build upon each other. So I recently learned how to TIG weld. And to understand why this is important or interesting, we gotta go back to the beginning where I talked about soldering and brazing. Soldering and brazing works great for gold and silver, but doing it with palladium presents a problem. And the problem is that palladium is an oxygen-hungry metal. So when you heat it up to its liquid, essentially melting point, it starts to suck up oxygen out of the air. And that's bad for jewelry because those oxygen bubbles actually are present in the metal. And then you end up having to grind them out, and sometimes they just get bigger and bigger. You have holes in your jewelry. So I got to thinking, doing a little bit of research, and I figured that I could probably TIG weld it. So TIG welding is a process that's normally used for like structural things like steel and aluminum, stuff like that. And the way it works is you have a really hard tungsten tip, and you run a really high electrical current through that, which creates heat. And outside of the tip is an argon gas shield. So you're blowing argon gas all around it to protect it. And if the argon is there, the oxygen can't be there. So this is, in theory, should work really well for palladium because you don't have the oxygen, you have the heat from electricity, and you should be able to get a really good weld. The other big advantage is that because you don't need another metal that has a lower melting point, you can use the actual same material. So what I did is I rolled out a piece of the actual palladium I used for the ring, made it really, really thin, and then used that as filler and built up the joint. Then I just file off the excess. The result is a ring that is literally only made from one alloy. It's all the same metal, and really there's no seam. After that, the process is the same. Stretch it out over the mandrel to make it back into the ring and get the size right, file it, and then finish it. So that's a wrap. I hope my friends enjoy their rings as much as I did making them and learning more about the process. If you're interested, I think it's something that anybody who has a general sense of how to use hand tools can